Ma'am.
What was it that brought you back to the church?
Well, my parents' prayers.
Besides the real estate crisis.
Besides the real estate crisis.
Rich, repeat the question.
All right, the question was, what is it that brought me back to the church? Let me qualify and say I was never completely away. Like I said, Christmas and Easter kind of stuff. There was enough that had been planted in the back of my mind that it was nagging at me. And then you find out gruesome things. Okay, I'm not going to go into the details of my life. But thank you, I'm glad it's okay. But you do seriously, I mean, okay, quick. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Okay, you outgrow it. You do. Okay, and it's like, I'm sorry, you look at yourself, and I'm not going to get into any more detail. If I'm blushing, I'm sorry. I'm not going to get into any more details than what I just said, but you finally look at yourself and say, this isn't working. Some people turn to AA. Okay, I went back to the church. Yes, ma'am.
What is, since you go to daily mass every day, what's your favorite part of the mass?
Wow, good one. What's my favorite part of the mass? That there's no singing.
That's not funny.
I'm sorry. Okay. My favorite part of the Mass is the readings. Okay. I love Scripture. Oh, what's your favorite Scripture passage? A lot of people say John 3:16, for God so loved the world. Mine is Galatians 3:1. One of the priests want to tell me what 3:1 was? It's 3 words. Oh, stupid Galatians. Okay, Paul was a very earthy guy. No, seriously, I love Scripture. I love Scripture and I love patristics, but we don't read patristics at Mass. So I definitely enjoy Scripture. I lead Scripture study at my parish, and that's really what I like. Christ the King.
Oh, nice.
Anyone else, I promise you it's not that interesting. Yes, sir.
How do you deal with non-Catholic professionals before you were an owner, back when you were trying to make it, how do you deal with the non-Catholic professionals and the professional world as it is?
All right, the question was, how do you deal with non-Catholic professionals? And the gentleman also put a qualifier in there, back before you're an owner. And I assume the thought behind that was when you're an owner, you can make choices and actually follow your conscience. When you're coming up, you kind of have to cut the corners a bit. That's kind of where you're going? Okay. My first thought is that the key lessons are true. The first, and one of the most important things in any business is be ethical. Be honest. Do it. Say what you're going to do. Don't lie. Treat your customers, your employees, your vendors, your investors, etc., the way you would want to be treated. And you want to know something? That's not just good Christianity. That's just practical business. So I will tell you, it's a question of, I keep going back to this thing you say before you're an owner. There are people I won't do business with, okay? And I have the luxury of making that decision because I am an owner. Thinking back to before I was an owner, I have to tell you that was during the era when I was away from the church. How's that? How's that for dodging the question?
Telling me to leave the church for a while?
No, I'm not. I'm absolutely not. If it does reach a point where you have to make a decision between your conscience and your paycheck, you will be able to find another paycheck. You won't be able to find another conscience. Okay. Now, how extreme does that have to be before you cross that bridge? I leave that up to you. I mean, believe me, how many attorneys in the room? Okay. I'm a CPA. All right, and I have to take professional ethics as a CPA, and you learn there's a line, and in the law you learn there's a line. For instance, you never lie, but you can keep quiet, right? right? Okay. So exactly where that line is, it may be more flexible than you think. And quite honestly, having a good confessor that you can kick that around with is a pretty good idea. Quick comment on the confessor. I would not expect every priest, with all due respect, Father, I would not expect every priest to be familiar with every potential pitfall there is in the business world. I have asked the business manager at Christ the King, I said, hey, I know you're not a priest, I'm not confessing to you, but here's a circumstance, what do you think? Is this something I should go to confession about? That kind of thing. So having people you can talk to is a big plus. Yes, ma'am.
Could you share one concrete example of how you share your Catholic faith within the workplace? I mean,
Sure. The question was, can I give one concrete example of how I share my Catholic faith in the workplace? Every time I go to lunch and I'm at a restaurant, I make the sign of the cross as big as I can. I'm not kidding. That's actually a real thing. I have to keep peace in my office, so I don't proselytize openly because my partner is a fallen away Catholic and basically a professing atheist. So I don't proselytize actively, but it's okay. One of our mutual friends is a Jewish guy, nice guy, very ethical. Love him to death. And basically, once over a drink, I said, Jerry, I have to tell you, I believe in the fullness of what the church teaches. I believe Jesus is who the church says he was. I said, I'm not going to press it on you, but if you ever want to talk about it, just let me know. That's it. It was a total of 30 seconds. Okay? And I'll do that every now and then. Yes, ma'am.
Could you talk a little bit about the history of Legatus and where it founded?
All right, the lady's question is a history of Legatus. Legatus was founded by Tom Monahan of Domino's Pizza fame. The guy that made $350 million or whatever it was and said, I literally need to follow the Lord's advice and give it all away. Now, he kept some strings attached with his foundation and all, but seriously, that's who founded Legatus, and his idea was to have an organization where Catholic leaders, Catholic business leaders, can give each other support about the kinds of things you're talking about, where you can Alan over here, my friend who's from Legatus. Hey, I got this issue. What do you think about this? And also gather for a drink and a meal with your spouse and listen to a challenging speaker. So that's the idea, but that's where it came from. And there's now, I want to say 50, 55 chapters around the country. The one here in Dallas is actually one of the smaller ones. We have about 25 members with their spouses. Some of them have 150. Oh, yes, sir, over here.
You mentioned dealing with ethical dilemmas in the workplace. Can you kind of talk about maybe how Catholic employers what their response can be to the Affordable Care Act and its promotion of things that contrast with Catholic teaching?
Okay. The question was, how can Catholic employers respond to the Affordable Care Act with which has some elements in it, which are, the gentleman used the expression contrary to Catholic teaching. I'm going to say that they are in fact oppressive and basically require a violation of conscience if you're to follow them strictly. That's a very, very tough question. I would not advise anybody not to follow the law. There are lawsuits, as you're probably aware, working their way through the courts. The lead plaintiffs in a couple of them are Legatus members. Specifically out of Michigan, there's one guy that is, I'm not sure who's supporting him financially in terms of where the money's coming from for the litigation, but he's taking the case. Look, you're talking about exempting religious organizations from the contraceptive mandate. It violates my conscience too. And how do you, I think fighting it through the courts is the first and obvious answer. Then the other things that people are doing to avoid the Affordable Care Act are, cutting back work hours to get part-time employees, cutting your business units to where they're under 50. I mean, there's all kinds of things. People just are trying to avoid the act in general. I'm not going to advise anybody not to obey the law, but I also think that if you go with something where you have employees and you give them HSAs, health savings accounts, where basically they shop for the policies themselves and you're not providing them the policy, you give them the money to go shop for a policy so that the decision is not yours. I think that might be one way around it. I don't know the details adequately to be able to give you a concrete answer, but I think it's the same moral situation. If you give them the money to buy insurance and you don't dictate what insurance they buy, you're absolved from moral turpitude. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So how did you go from wild time in the 80s to master this theology? I mean, how did you make that transition? What were you looking for?
I was looking for an adult understanding of the faith. I realized, as I mentioned earlier, that I had a 12th grade understanding of the faith. And it was just, I need an adult understanding of the faith. And that's why I did it. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about public speaking. So you're able to come up with a speech that bar and deliver it so eloquently. So I was wondering if you're always able to do this, or how did you develop the skills?
Well, first of all, the lady said she had a question about public speaking. How did I do this? By the grace of God. Where's Father Rudy? Father Rudy said the Spirit will be with you. I said, yes, indeed. She is. But in an honest answer, I do a lot of teaching. I'm a lector at my parish. I've done a fair amount of public speaking, and I did have 2 hours worth of preparation. And the topics I've told you about are things that I've thought about myself. If you were to ask me, Rich, give a talk on nuclear physics, I would say, oh, no, I don't know anything. But the topics that I pick, that's what, you want to know how to be a good public speaker? You get to pick the topic, right? You can talk on something very well. All right, I got one more.
We all know that we live in a very, in all honesty, sadly, a relativistic world.
Right.
Especially in business. Business is considered whatever it takes to get it done.
I don't think so.
I see that a lot in business I've encountered. And luckily, the company I work for doesn't take it that way. But how can we, going forward, interested in business and growing our professions, not sacrifice what we believe for the sake of getting ahead? How have you done it, and how have you seen it done?
Okay. I'll give you the one big lesson I've learned about how to get ahead. Control capital. And I mean that, okay? Unless you're Michael Jackson or Michael Jordan, okay, selling your time for money is not really going to get you there. And I mean that, okay? Now, controlling capital doesn't necessarily need to mean what I do, which is owning apartment buildings. If you're a partner in a law firm, and you law associates here know this, their capital is the billable hours of their associates. Okay? Move to some posture, think like an entrepreneur, not like an employee. At the end of the day, get as much control over your environment as you can, whether that's being a contract worker. Now, I realize not everybody's temperament is to be an entrepreneur, okay? But I would strongly encourage you to get as much control over your work environment as you can. And the way I've learned to do that, and this is a lesson, anybody that, if you can do it, is get control of some capital. So there's a legitimate return to labor, there's a legitimate return to capital. Capital's fat and lazy, though. I mean, it is. Our investors could own the apartment buildings directly if they wanted to, but they hire us to do it. So instead of a 10% return, they could get a 14% return if they did it themselves. We harvest the difference for providing the entrepreneurship. Okay, get in that position someplace. That would be my advice. And then you can pick and choose who you do business with. I mean, we and my partner, even though he's an avowed atheist, he's a very ethical guy. We have said we won't do certain things and we won't deal with certain people. Lie to me once, shame on you. Lie to me twice, shame on me. There's people we won't do business with.